Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we are in round 8 of our coverage, the 2016 Sinquefield Cup. Our competitors today, Levon Aronian playing the white pieces. He is our defending champion, although he hasn't had the best tournament so far. He's in the middle of the pack. And then we also have Nakamura playing the black pieces. This is the 5th and 6th ranked player in the world. Facing off Nakamura, kind of in the same boat that Levon Aronian is. They're in the middle of the pack, definitely looking to get a victory here to propel them with the last day tomorrow. They want to be up near the top of the leaderboard to make as much money as possible and just to earn those much needed points in the Grand Prix. So we'll get started with Levon Aronian. Pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn c4, pawn e6, knight f3, pawn down to d5, and then knight c3. So the Queen's Gambit decline line getting there from a little bit different variation as we usually see in the Queen's Gambit decline line. Bishop here to e7, bishop f4. Always like in the Queen's Gambit decline line before you play pawn here to e3, getting your dark square bishop involved into the game. It can be a very, very difficult task if you play pawn to e4 or pawn to e3 to ever get your dark square bishop involved. So doing that early makes a lot of sense. Castle on the king side, pawn here to e3. Pawn c5, we do see some exchange off the board. Bishop down here, c5. Bishop d3, pawn takes, the bishop recaptures, pawn here to a6, and then bishop back here to d3. But if you look at both sides of the board, we almost have a mirror match going on. Now this dark square bishop is a little bit more involved into the game, and you'll see that come into play as this light square bishop has a hard time getting activated because it did not come out before the pawn here to e6. But both sides with a similar setup, and then pawn here to a6 from Nakamura, changing things up a little bit. Bishop back here to d3. Knight c3, or c6, both sides just continuing their development. Castle on the king side, and then knight to b4. So Nakamura is the first one to really extend his pieces and really start an attack on his opponent's side of the board. So knight here to b4, bishop comes back here to b1. You just don't see the bishop on b1 very often, but now we see an exchange on board, the queen down to d1, rook recaptures, and then knight to d5. White takes on d5, knight recaptures on d5, and then bishop up here to e4. So both sides looking fairly good in the center of the board. Black does have to worry about getting his light square bishop involved into the board, so that's kind of his next act that he's going to be looking to do. Knight up here to f6. Knight here to d2, and then rook to e8. I really don't like the rook to e8 move. I don't know that it's terrible, just me personally. I feel like knight taking on e4 is much more important. This bishop, this light square bishop, is a huge pain for Nakamura to deal with. This pawn can't move because the rook would fall. The bishop can't move because the pawn would fall. And so the entire queen side just kind of stuck there. And as soon as the rook comes here to e8, all of a sudden bishop back here to f3. And it's just eyeing down on the queen side of the board. Usually, you know, from White's perspective, his bishops are looking on the king side. But he recognizes here he has a strong attack on the queen side. So both this light square bishop and dark square bishop just eyeing down on the queen side. So for that reason, I think just go ahead and get off your knight, have an exchange, that's fine on board. You could see the knight, or after the knight comes back here to d2, knight takes here on e4. After the knight captures here, bishop back here to a7. I think this is going to be completely fine for Nakamura. But in the game, he decided to play rook to e8, bishop back to f3, as we talked about. Kind of a pain for black to deal with. Pawn here to e5, bishop back here to g3. And then rook to a7. That's kind of one of those awkward moves where this doesn't really do all that much, except it does allow him to free up his bishop, finally move his pawn, but you usually don't want to be playing rook to a7 just so you can move your pawn. Rook over here to c1, and Levon Aronian's doing a good job. Whenever you have your rooks, you want them to control open files. Right now, the C and the D file are open, and he's controlling both of those with his rooks. Nakamura, on the other hand, one rook's here on a7, not doing anything, and the other rook here on e8. It is behind a pawn, which eventually you want to have in the endgame pushing for, but right now it's not doing too much except playing defense. So I'd much rather be in White's perspective right now, being the aggressor on board. Pawn here to b6, getting that pawn involved into the action as we talked about. Pawn a3, bishop here d7. Knight c4, just getting involved into the center of the board a little bit. Pawn to e4. Pawn back here, or bishop back here, e2. Pawn a5. And then knight up here to d6, attacking the rook. Says, hey, if you want to go ahead and exchange your bishop, give me the double bishop pair, that's fine. He decides to play rook here to e7, and then rook b5, attacking the rook. The rook decides not to move, and instead we do see an exchange on board. So Levon Aronian has a pretty good setup. He has the double bishop pair. That's a check. That's always going to be good, especially in an open game like this where there's not a lot of pawns clogging up the center of the board. It also has the rooks controlling the central file. So all in all, white has a really good setup. Nakamura needs to find a way to get some sort of attack going. Rook a8, and then king to f1. Now that the double bishop pair from black's off the board and the queen's off the board, Levon Aronian decides now is a good time to start getting his king involved into the action. So king here to f1, a rook here to e6, king up e2, and then pawn to g5. So recognizing that his opponent pretty much has the domination on the queen side, he starts to push forward a little bit on the king side. Bishop back c4, attacking the rook. Rook back to e8, and then pawn up here to h4. We do see an exchange over here on the king side, so it's going to be interesting to see if any side brings the rook over to h1, tries to sneak in behind the defense. On the center of the board, it's going to be much easier for white to get behind enemy lines, really start to attack, and put a lot of pressure on his opponent's pieces. But you could definitely see king here to g7, swinging the rook over here to h8, bringing it down to h2, even behind enemy lines. Rook to h1 if Nakamura decides to go ahead and go that route. Bishop up here d6, king g7, bishop b5, attacking the rook. We do now see an exchange on board after rook takes on d6. The rook is forced to move, but now the rook swings over here to b6, and Levon Aronian goes up a pawn in material. So his continuation that he found was really nice in that he gave him an extra pawn, and he found a way to activate his rook. Really, really nice play from Levon Aronian. His goal is going to be to hang on to this material and eventually use his bishop to gobble up some more material. When you get to the end game, bishops usually do better if there's pawns on both sides of the board. Knights normally do better if there's pawns on one side of the board. Since there's pawns on both sides of the board, definitely give an even bigger advantage to white with the bishop there. Rook over here to h8. We said that might be a possibility. Rook to b7. Getting it on the 7th rank is always important, and if you're black, you usually want to get that down onto the 2nd rank. Rook here to f5, rook over here f1, protecting the pawn here on f2, and then rook down here to h2. So this is good, bring it down here to h2. Unfortunately, it missed a big attack here with bishop to c4. He probably should have just played king to g6. Then if bishop here to c4, knight g4 probably makes a lot of sense. But in the game, he played rook down here, h2, bishop c4, knight up here to e7. There is, if you can kind of see it here, the bishop and the rook are both attacking the pawn. So the knight's kind of forced to move with a discovered defense with the rook here on f5, protecting the pawn here on f7. And then rook down here, b5, attacking the rook. The rook takes, and then the bishop recaptures, attacking the knight. Knight comes down here to d6, and then kind of the move that puts it all together, and that is bishop up here to d7. This is just a really good move because now all of a sudden this protects, although it doesn't look like it, actually protects from rook over here to g2, because then you can just see rook to d1, attacking the knight. The knight's forced to move after the knight moves. Then rook over here to h1 stops this rook from being able to go anywhere. Can't come here to g1, it's captured. Can't come here to g3, it's captured. Can't come here to g4, it would be captured from the bishop. And there's no way to really stop this. If we see king to g6, then just bishop down here to h3, the rook is going to fall. If instead we were to see pawn to g4, trying to stop this a little bit, then king to f1, and then knight potentially over here to e3, sacrificing. Pawn takes on e3, rook over here b2, and then rook to g1, getting ready to gobble up more material. Yes, he did hold onto his rook, but white has the bishop, and he's going to be able to gobble up material, and he shouldn't lose any more material. If he doesn't want to, just play pawn here to a4. It is being protected by the bishop. Could even bring it down here to b5, just kind of have these pawn and bishop holding on to each other. So all in all, this would be a terrible mistake. Good news for Nakamura, he decides not to do that. Instead, he decides to play that king to f6, and then rook over here c1, a rook back here to h8. So he brought it down here to h2, wanted to have a strong attack, but he just didn't have it, so he decided to retreat in that position. Pawn here to b3, a king here to e7, attacking the bishop, and then rook up here to c7, adding a little more protection and an attack on the black side. Nakamura plays rook h1, trying to get behind enemy lines. Rook to a7, and then rook over here a1. White continues with pawn to g4, and then the rook recaptures. I just really don't like this. He has the potential discovered attack with bishop here to g4, and then after the king moves, now the rook can play rook a8 if he wants to, in between move, and then take the pawn here on a5. And his pawn on a3 is not going to fall. Now, in the game, we saw that instead of the bishop coming down, discovered attack, we see pawn up here to g4. Now, after the rook takes on a3, bishop comes down here, a4, discovered attack. He is able to gain that material on a5, but you can see that his pawn did fall on a3. So I think he could have gone up a little bit more material, but all in all, this is still a fine position. He's still up a pawn, still has the better minor piece, the bishop over the knight, since there's the pawn here, and he can just control so much of the board right here. Rook back here, a2, king f1, pawn f6, rook over here to a8. We do see a nice little attack here on the king. Rook here, b2, rook a7, just forcing the king to move exactly where he wants to, and then eventually we see bishop here f5, discovered attack, and then king to e8, and this stops the king from ever getting past this 7th rank for the time being, unless the knight were to move in front of the rook and stop that. But this does limit the mobility that black has, and then after that move, we see the bishop come back here to e6. This is kind of the setup that Levon Aronian wanted, because this is a very centralized bishop. It's protecting the pawn. The pawn didn't have to do much at all, and at the same time, as we said, this king on e8 is not going to be coming past the 7th rank. Rook here to b1, king g2, nice safe square, rook here b2, and then bishop d5. So it's just centralizing a little bit, still protecting this pawn here on b3, gearing up for an attack if he wants to on e4. Next move is somewhat odd, and that's rook to b1. I think it's probably better to get it on the open file, rook here to c2, but he decides to play rook to b1, bishop c6, attacking the king. Rook over here, d7, says, hey, you can take my pawn now, but I'm going to go ahead and take your knight. Knight up here to f7, bishop takes on e4, says you can go ahead and capture if you want to, but it's going to be bad. You can't take on b3 now because rook takes, king takes, bishop here to d5 check. The rook's going to fall. 3 pawns and a bishop against 2 pawns is a very, very easy endgame for a world-class player. So in the game, we saw rook to b2. Rook over here, b7, protecting that. Knight to d6. Rook up here, b8 check. And then we see kind of the same thing before. Bishop here, d5, but all of a sudden that pawn here on e4 is gone. So white's doing a good job of gobbling up material, improving his position along the way. Rook here, d2, attacking the bishop, pawn to e4 is a nice little move. It forces getting into the endgame exactly how Levon Aronian wants it, because this is very tough for black to deal with. The pawn and the bishop in the center of the board. There's just no real good way to attack this. Pawn to f5. We see the pawn capture here. The knight takes on f5. Now to get this material, the bishop's going to fall, but that's going to be completely okay. Rook here to b7, kind of an in-between move. Now we see exactly the position that Levon Aronian wants. Then after the pawn takes on f5, the bishop's going to fall, but there's no way to really stop the threat of all of these passed pawns. F pawn is pushed, the passed is passed, he can start to push it. This pawn here on b3 can start to push it. So all in all, it's going to be a very difficult game for Nakamura to even hold on for a draw. The good news for Nakamura, he does continue to play out. So many players would resign in this position, but he says, hey, you know what? I only have 1 day left in the tournament. Let's continue to play it out. Rook here to d4, king g3, king g6, pushing up f7, getting ready to promote. Pawn up here, b4. This rook's doing a good job of protecting both of his pawns. King f8, so it's not going to be doing too much, just staying up here on f8. And then a rook over here, b4. Pawn at b6, and now it is time to get the king involved into the game. And there's no way to really stop this on board. Levon Aronian just marches his king up. And then eventually on board, Nakamura decides, hey, once the rook comes here to a7, he's going to be able to get his king involved, pushes pawn up to b8, and it's going to be game over. So Nakamura falls. Levon Aronian, last year's champion, wins, moves him up into the top of the leaderboard, although he is not in first. I don't think he's going to be winning this one, but he's definitely near the top. So congratulations to Levon Aronian with a well-deserved victory. Thank you guys for watching round 8. We do have one more round tomorrow, so definitely look out for that one. But thanks again. I'll see you guys in the next round.